Welcome to this evening's program, A History of Iconic American Photographs. We're joined this evening by Martha Chiarchiaro. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items for everybody. We are going to ask that folks remain muted and type questions or comments in the chat. We will save time at the end to go over them. But we are recording this evening's program, so that'll help ensure that we get a good quality recording. I will send out the link to the recording along with a handout of the images that are in tonight's program once that recording is available on our YouTube channel. And I have put the link to tonight's survey in the chat. So if you could take a moment at the end of the program to fill that out and let us know how we did. We always like to see those. They help us continue to get funding for programs like this. And if you have suggestions for other topics that you would like to see programs on, you can always put them on that survey. That helps us to ensure that we're getting programs that you are interested in. So I did also want to mention some of our upcoming programs that we have. I'm going to share my screen here. And the first program that I wanted to mention is for Hispanic Heritage Month coming up on September 25th at 6:30. We're going to be joined by Janet Mendel. She is going to be talking about Diego Rivera and his Mexican murals that he is most well known for, as well as his other works. So that should be a very interesting program. That one is on Zoom. Then on the 7th of October, we are going to be joined by Dr. Bohanec. She's going to be back talking about the tinted tales coloring the silver screen. So the move from black and white to color in film and how that all came about. So looking forward to that one as well. And that one is also at 6:30 on Zoom. And then on October 8th, we're going to be joined by Annette Isaacs. She will be talking about some of the different culinary treats that Germany is best known for. So things like sauerkraut, bratwurst, some of those other schnitzel, some of those other treats, as well as the history of those items in the German culture. And then on October 14th at 6:30, Gene Flynn is going to be back. This time he's going to be taking us on an armchair travel trip to Western Ireland and exploring both the more rural life and some of the more modern aspects that you will find in that area. And then finally, for those of you who are here in the Kansas City area, we have Bill Nix, who does a first-person portrayal of Ike Eisenhower, who will be at a number of our different branches throughout September and October doing his one-man show. So we hope you'll join us for some of those programs. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can turn it over to Martha here and let her get started with this evening's program.
Great. Great. Oh, Beth, thank you so much. It is my pleasure to be back again to share with you a history of iconic American photographs. What I'm hoping to achieve this evening is for you to think at the end of this program how important photography is in our culture in terms of when they say the term, an image is worth 1,000 words. When you see many of these images that I'll be sharing with you, I think you probably will be able to remember what was happening. You probably recognize many of them. You may remember what you were doing at the time that the photograph is representing. And so, really, just the importance of photography. Now, some of the earlier ones you won't be perhaps as familiar with, and certainly you wouldn't have been part of our culture. But I'm trying to give you about 175 years of photographs in our American history. And as Beth had mentioned, in conjunction with our last program on architectural wonders, someone had asked if I could provide a list of the images that I had shown you. And so, to be proactive this time, I had sent off a list this morning to Beth so that she'll be able to include this. So if you're going back and wanting to try to remember some of the photographs, you'll be seeing them in chronological order. So that will be available to you after the program. And certainly there'll be time for questions at the end. I'm sure I haven't included photographs that you've thought about as iconic American photographs, but hopefully, again, I've included a number of them that will be memorable to you, and also perhaps some new ones for you. Because we are going to be looking at a variety of different images. You can see many of the black and white images, many of the color images, and they so often represent a moment in time, but that reflects so closely on our history. And I want to be sharing that with you and just how important photographs are. And the first one that I'm going to share with you, again, comes from almost 175 years ago, because we're looking at a work by John Adams Whipple. And this is one of the early photographs of the moon. It was in the Photographic Art Journal from May of 1853, but it was originally shown at the Great Exposition in London in 1851. This exposition,
Martha,
oh,
your
yes?
screen is not shared. Can you reshare
Oh,
it?
okay. Let's see here. All right, I may have to go out again. Just a second. And show. Okay, let's see here. Are you seeing it now?
Yes.
Okay, super. Very good. Thank you. So again, as you can see in this particular image, we're going to be looking at a variety of different photographs, really covering about 170 years of our history. Some iconic images that you're familiar with, others that again remind us of events. And when we think about, again, a photograph bringing back so many emotional memories, so much of our history, sit back, relax, and again enjoy the photographic history of our culture. And I'm sharing with you this first one that, although it was in the Photographic Art Journal from 1853, it was first exhibited in the Great Exposition in London in 1851. Now, photography, as what we refer to as a daguerreotype, the first photographs were only created as of 1840 in America. The first commercial photographs or photographic studios were created around 1840. And we have this image shown of the moon at this great exposition in London. This, in fact, was the first, what we might call World's Fair. It was done in London. King Prince Albert was focused primarily on this. But think about the date, 1851. This was just after the major revolutions in Europe taking place between 1848 and 1849. England and America, you might say, England was the only European country that was not faced with revolutionary efforts. These efforts were not successful. It was basically the peasant class rising up against the nobility, but they weren't very successful. But Victoria realized that we needed to pull together Europe. And the reason I mention how important this is that it is the first great exposition, the first great World's Fair that literally pulled people from across the world. And it was an opportunity for Americans in this case to share their expertise in one of the most beautiful images of the moon ever to have been created. And when we see, here's a quote again from the exposition jury report: one of the most satisfactory attempts that has yet been made to realize by a photographic process the telescopic appearance of a heavenly body, and must be regarded as indicating the commencement of a new era in astronomical representation. So very early on, we're able to see these iconic images that really share with us the history. So it's an American photographer showing his work in this London experience. And we will find over the years that photography and innovations in photography become an important part of these expositions. Another individual, certainly I don't think I need to introduce Abraham Lincoln. Excuse me. This is a photograph on the left-hand side of Abraham Lincoln. It was done in 1860 as part of his campaign, his presidential campaign. Matthew Brady was one of the most important photographers, certainly before the Civil War and after the Civil War. He had a studio in New York City. But you can see the variety of different photographs as a young man running as a senator. And in fact, Abraham Lincoln was one of the first politicians to use this new medium of photography for his campaign. It's hard to believe in our era today of the commercials and the posters and so much Twitter, so much going on with the media. But in fact, and as the 16th president, presidents were not usually campaigning for themselves. It was basically just accepted. It was kind of gauche to campaign. But Abraham Lincoln, through the use of Matthew Brady's studio, was one of the first politicians to use photography. And again, it was a very effective medium to really publicize in this new medium that was being used. Now, interestingly enough, around the same time, Frederick Douglass was in fact the most photographed man of his time, even more so than Abraham Lincoln. Because what he wanted to do, the abolitionist wanted to ensure a more accurate depiction of Black Americans during the tumultuous years before the Civil War. And this was, again, an opportunity as a young man, you see on the left-hand side, and as he continued as a distinguished politician and speaker. Photography not only had the opportunity to help win a campaign, as Lincoln had used, but it also helped to identify and to build up an image, in this case, that of Frederick Douglass. He saw the value and the importance of photography, again, as a very early medium, and one that was he was able to use very, very effectively so that people could, again, see his image. And that image meant so much as a distinguished man, a scholar, a politician. It was his photograph, again, that made such a difference in terms of how people saw him. We also know, as part of Matthew Brady's studio, Timothy O'Sullivan, an Irish American, created this iconic image in 1863. It was called A Harvest of Death, Gettysburg, July 14th, 1863. It was the first time that a war had been captured so candidly, so you might say, with all of its horror and all of its quiet and even the simplicity. And it was Timothy O'Sullivan's image that really began to focus on what was really happening during this war. Photography was a new medium, again, only about 13 years in the making here in America, and the same pretty much in Europe where it was discovered by Louis Daguerre. But now suddenly, war and the horrors of war became known to people not only in America, but across the world. I often think of the invention of photography as being very similar to that of the computer in our own generation. What did the computer do? It really kind of shrunk our world. We were now able to communicate very quickly in a way that we had never done before. I mean, certainly the cable, the telegraph, and such, but photography did a very similar thing. People and images like this of Gettysburg were shared not only, as they say, in America, but across the world. People were now able to witness, as if in firsthand, what was happening during this war. Now, we might think about Winslow Homer, who was creating etches for the Harper's Weekly, or paintings that would be included in Harper's Weekly. Same time period. Winslow Homer was one of the artists during the Civil War. But think of how much more emotional, how much more of an impact the actual image would be rather than just an etching. And that's what photography did. We also know that photography was able to uh, prove a bet. And in fact, out in California, Leland Stanford, and that, yes, that is one of the founders of Stanford. He is the founder of Stanford University. He had a bet. He had a horse, and he had a bet that the feet, at some point when a horse was galloping, that all four legs were not touching the ground. And it took, I think, about 4 years or so to be able to prove this. It was Edward Muybridge, uh, an English photographer. And if you're familiar, Edward Muybridge was very much involved with Edison in creating the motion picture, because what he realized that you would do is when you created a series of still images, and then you put them together in a film strip, you could have it as if you were moving. And if you've ever bought one of those little books, it might be an athletic figure, it might be a nude woman, it might be a horse, and they would cluster them together, staple them together, and then you'd click them through as if it was moving. And in fact, it was Edward Muybridge, not so much from photography itself, but it was the electric flash that allowed him to be able to take these very quick gates, very quick images that would trigger one after the other, a dozen cameras all triggering at once with a very important kind of lighting. So it's the timer now that became so important. And I think it might be this one up here that proved the point, or maybe it was this one of these two, that in fact, at some point during a horse's stride, all four legs are off the ground. And so this is another iconic image that proved a bet that Leland Stanford had. And he was very much encouraging the technology of photography to be able to create this. And in fact, it was shown in Scientific American in 1878. We also know in 1900, I don't really have this as an iconic image, but it's really the concept. In 1900, Kodak, and Kodak, if you know, again, Eastman Johnson, Eastman, Eastman Kodak, the name of it, but Kodak was kind of a made up name. Uh, Eastman wanted something that was very firm. And so he was starting to combine a variety of different sounds. So he came up with the word Kodak. But in 1900, 125 years ago, he introduces the first Brownie camera, a very inexpensive, user reloadable point and shoot box camera. The first version sold for $1. The second version sold for $2. Now, then that was not an inexpensive amount of money, but it revolutionized photography because now it was no longer just the photojournalists or the individuals who had their own dark rooms. It really became a much more public experience to take a photograph. And I certainly remember my Brownie camera, and even remember the Polaroid cameras, so many different cameras. But 1900 was a very strategic time when photography became really accessible to so many individuals. But we still, though, have, and I think what we'll find is the artistic photographs became even more important after 1900. Certainly events, historic events that were being captured. In 1903, December 17th, the Wright Flyer, the first powered flight ever at Kitty Hawk in North Carolina, Orville Wright manning the controls while Wilbur Wright is on the ground. And so the camera was able to capture this momentous occasion. December 17th, 1903, first powered flight. And so it's this historic element, these iconic images that if photography hadn't existed, you might have had individual artists, painting a scene or sketching something afterwards. But to actually see this momentous occasion, again, was revolutionary. And prints of this would then be scattered around the world at this momentous event. Another image that you may be very familiar with, Alfred Stieglitz, an American photographer, created this work called The Steerage in 1907. There's a copy of this at the Worcester Art Museum. It's one that's certainly very, very popular. But I wanted to share a little bit about the history. Alfred Stieglitz, you may know, eventually married George O'Keeffe. Alfred Stieglitz had Gallery 291 in New York City. He was probably one of the most important individuals, not only as a photographer, but as a gallery owner in the early 20th century in America, because he promoted the works of modern artists like George O'Keeffe, Arthur Dove, John Marin. He bought works by Picasso, Cezanne, Matisse. He was very much involved in early 20th century modern art. But this is a work that, in fact, is fairly early in his career. He was crossing over from New York to London with his first wife and his daughter. And he was obviously in a very, not in steerage. He was in kind of first class accommodations, and he walked over to the steerage area. And he comments, there's a large kind of a diary of this. He saw this man with the hat. He saw the pipe coming up. He saw this diagonal across the walkway. He saw this woman in white with the hat. He later talks about the energy in this photograph. He ran down the hallways. He ran to his studio, his cabin. He came back, and he was so relieved that these individuals whom he had seen basically were still standing there. And this is a photograph that he took. And he writes himself, some months later, after the steerage was printed, I felt satisfied, something I have not been very often. When it was published, I felt that if all my photographs were lost and I were represented only by the steerage, that would be quite all right. So we know not only had this become an iconic image capturing life going across the Atlantic in 1907, and the variety of different individuals who were traveling across. But it also was an important image for Alfred Stieglitz himself. And so again, it has become an iconic image, the steerage. This is a scene that I actually saw for the first time in my husband's aunt's house. She's a New Yorker. She was born in the Bronx, and she had this in her den area, and I was always fascinated by this. It's a work by Eberts, Charles Clyde Eberts, Lunch Atop a Skyscraper. This is the 69th floor of the RCA building in New York. It was shown in the Tribune, the New York Herald Tribune, in 1932. And you can see that it's just a fabulous image. And again, where they were standing, probably on the girders over here, but somebody, again, this photographer was very interested in creating this particular image, probably saw these workers, probably thought this would be a fun place to really capture this. And just, the relaxed quality of these individuals high above New York City. And again, this has often been considered an iconic image. Again, less than 100 years ago. Great fun in seeing this image. We also know in the 1930s, with the Depression, we know that when FDR became president, that he, again in 1934, then 1935, he ended up as part of the New Deal, realizing how important it was for Americans to understand what was happening across the country. There were a number of different initiatives. I've offered a program on the WPA, what works of art being created during the 1930s, but photography was a particular group. And it was interesting that it was the farm administration group that hired a number of photographers. Dorothea Lange was one of them. She has a number of iconic images. This is the one that I wanted to share with you. Certainly, the 1930s was an important time for photography because the federal government had this group of individuals through the farm administration group, and they were tasked to go out and photograph in the cities, in New York City, in Chicago, but also in the West, in the Dust Bowl, to share with the rest of the country what was happening during this difficult time of the Depression. And what's interesting is this is an actual how should I say, a staged photograph. Dorothea Lange worked with this woman, worked with Florence Thompson quite a bit. And not that it looks staged, it looks rather, again, it's just so emotionally strong in this piece. But she had the baby again here in her arms. The kids were over on the side, and so she did a variety of different compositions with this image, and this is the one that she wanted to share. And it just became such an emblem of the difficulties that people, particularly out in the West, were experiencing as part of the Depression, as part of the Dust Bowl, and certainly has become an iconic image. But you'll find a number of photographers during this particular period, particularly who were being supported by the federal government. The WPA, the Works Progress Administration, was one of the most important and has never been replicated in terms of the commitment to the arts, in terms of sharing this with individuals. And certainly this particular group, and Dorothea Lange was one of the most important in this group. But I also wanted to share with you, as we move out of the Depression, as we again became part of World War II, we also see coming back to America a photographer like Gordon Parks. Gordon Parks was one of the first Black Americans to be hired by Life magazine. Now, Life magazine was kind of a mecca for photojournalists. It really was known for its photographs. And from 1936, and isn't it interesting that during the Depression, this incredibly important publication should have come about? So from 1936 to 1972, Life magazine dominated the weekly force in American media photojournalism. In 1950, 59% of Americans, over 8.1 Americans, were reading Life magazine. Can you imagine? 59%. Now, we might say, well, with Twitter and Facebook, you can have millions of people reading. But think about a magazine that had that kind of an impact. And this is certainly, Gordon Parks was capturing, what was happening in America, particularly during World War II. And this is American Gothic, Washington, D.C. It's Ella Watson. And Ella Watson was a worker. She was a cleaner in the government buildings. And many of you might be familiar, actually, out in the Midwest. American Gothic I'm trying to think if it's in Chicago. It was a work by Grant Wood that kind of emblemizes this. It was a man and actually Grant Wood's dentist and his aunt, but it kind of gives us that iconic image in painting, now gives us this iconic image of this worker, and he's really captured with the American flag in the background and what is really happening with race relations during this time. But Life magazine, again, in hiring Gordon Parks, one of the first Black American photographers. And you might be familiar with his work as a director. Shaft was one of the first films that he had created a little bit later than this. But again, Gordon Parks was creating these iconic images and really capturing, just as Dorothea Lange had captured during the Depression, Gordon Parks is now looking at the racial situation here in America. And Arnold Newman, again, an artist who lived until the 21st century, he also, too, captured kind of the emotional impact of the images. And as I had mentioned, this is, in fact, Alfred Stieglitz and George O'Keeffe being photographed by Arnold Newman. And can you see where he's really creating not just an image of the two of them, but a sense of the relationship? By this time, 1944, Alfred Stieglitz would die in 1946. In the late 1920s, by about 1929, George O'Keeffe was spending her summers in New Mexico. The relationship had been deteriorating. Alfred Stieglitz took a lover during this time, and it was devastating for George O'Keeffe. And so by 1944, although when he died, she spent 3 years working on his estate, distributing his photographs. This is one actually that came to the Worcester Art Museum directly from Arnold Newman in 1962. But he really captured the relationship between the two of them. He was the dominant force in this relationship, and she'd really been quite broken. George O'Keeffe had been broken by this time and would go on for another 40 years and produce art of her own. But Arnold Newman has created this iconic image of this very powerful couple, artistic couple. But I think you can see, again, the dynamic has certainly been captured here. As we move along, 1945, February 23rd, 1945, in Iwo Jima, another iconic image as the Americans, the Old Glory goes up on this particular image. Again, the drama, the dynamics. Joe Rosenthal, again, was there wanting to capture this. We had photographers embedded in these various wars. And this was, again, an image that was so powerful, something that was sent across the world, and certainly gave Americans a great relief that perhaps the end of the war was in sight. And so we have here an opportunity to see how important images are, not only in capturing the moment in time, this historic event on February 23rd, 1945, but what it did for individuals across the world and certainly across our own country, that the Americans would be successful in World War II. And as we continue and seeing these various images, we can see this is one you might not have recognized the photographer, Alfred Eisenstadt. But again, he was a German American. VJ Day in Times Square, August 14th in 1945. Again, a Life magazine image. We do know that the Getty Images, again, Life magazine, up until I think it was not what was 1972, really would capture. They had some of the best photographers, they had some of the best editors, and they would really be capturing many of these moments. And we see here also, many of these images have been preserved by the Getty Museum, Getty Images, that's in California. And they've really done a lot to protect many of these images. But again, this was just a random situation that came up and again became an iconic image of the celebration and the vivacity of VJ Day in Times Square in New York. Looking at Arnold Newman again, as we compare the work from 1944 of George O'Keeffe, this is Igor Stravinsky. Stravinsky also settled in California. He was, again, originally from Russia, but you can see Arnold Newman, just as he had done with George O'Keeffe and Alfred Stieglitz. He's created almost as if it's a musical a musical note in the piano itself, and these wonderful juxtapositions. So we see these works and the artistic impact of these. People would have known Igor Stravinsky quite well. Again, he was an immigrant to America during the war and settled in California. Again, another gift from the artist. I work quite often at the Worcester Art Museum, and they're fortunate to have this great collection. We also have in this work from April of 1949, we see images of kind of artistic heroes, artistic innovators of the time. And this is an image of Jackson Pollock painting in his studio. It's these kind of images in April of 1949. This was for Life magazine. Now, unfortunately, we can also find that it was an image like this when you're on the cover of Life magazine, and the comment is Jackson Pollock the most important American artist of his time. The pressure that this put on him, this wasn't the cover page, but it was part of the story that took place. Unfortunately, this kind of fame was very detrimental to Jackson Pollock, and we're capturing again the emotion of the artist in his drip paintings, in his as an action painter, in his studio, in his barn on Long Island. But this article in Life magazine ended up being almost detrimental, certainly to his health. And he eventually, again, he drank quite a bit, and he ended up, unfortunately, dying in an auto accident only about 7 years after this was taken. But we are able to capture in these images the working process of an artist so innovative in the work of Jackson Pollock. I just love this. When I was researching for this presentation, I couldn't resist this work. Everman is not an artist, a photographer that I'm familiar with, but I just thought in 1952, this kind of I don't remember. I was born in 1956. I don't know if anybody on the presentation remembers this, but I certainly remember hearing about these 3D glasses, and certainly we had used them at various times, but I just think it's wonderful. And this is a Paramount Theater, and Juana Devil, the first full-length color 3D movie. Perhaps the individual who will be speaking on film and movies going from black and white to color will be commenting on the 3D element. But I just thought this was great. And again, shown in Life magazine, these various innovations. And I just think it's wonderful to look at the variety of people, their haircuts, and just the clothing, making sure that the men are coming with their ties. I mean, even the women are pretty dressed up here, but I just really enjoyed this particular piece, part of our culture from the 1950s. And this is certainly from 1954. Marilyn Monroe, the 7-year itch dress, when she's in New York City, Lexington Ave between 52nd and 53rd Street. You have to remember that because I don't think I've really thought about the timing. And you probably know this was Sam Shaw, and there was a subway going by. The subway was going by underneath this grate. And when the air came up, I think there were several different images of this. She might have been walking by and this had happened. And so then they started to really plan this when Marilyn Monroe was shown in this particular image. And again, it became an iconic image being captured as the subway was heading by. But it was pretty much a staged image. I mean, there were several different variations of it, but it was a wonderful marketing image for the 7-year itch, starring Marilyn Monroe. And this is an important image. And as we kind of continue through August of 1963, this is Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream speech. And you can see he's in Washington, D.C. on the Mall. He's being photographed. And again, many political figures in these iconic images, just over 100 years since Abraham Lincoln had issued the Emancipation Proclamation. So photography continued to capture these various events. We see here Ansel Adams, as we're looking more and more at some of the artistic images. We have political images, we have artistic images, and Ansel Adams, particularly working out west, was certainly capturing a variety of these images. And one of his portfolios, What Majestic Word in Memory of Russell Varian. Russell Varian was one of the, again, a photographer during this period, an artist during this period. So we see in these images, particularly with Ansel Adams, really capturing nature in a very artistic way. This is an event, again, November 22nd, 1963. This is before the fatal shooting of John F. Kennedy. And what's interesting is when Life magazine had access to the color photo of the actual assassination, they chose not to print that in color. In respect, it was almost just too emotional, too devastating for individuals. So I wanted to share this particular piece with you. Certainly, this is just minutes before the assassination took place in Dallas, Texas. And so we're looking at this, again, the whole series, and Life magazine chose, and I have chosen, because the images are very poor in terms of the one when it looks like Jackie's kind of coming out of the back of the car, and to be able to say, well, she's trying to capture some of his brain, and it was just, but Time Life did not want to show those images. Again, just too devastating for the American public. And certainly these iconic images, as in this one, certainly associated with the burial of John F. Kennedy. Again, we have John F. Kennedy Jr., who again turned 3 on this day, again saluting as his father's burial procession goes by. These are, again, iconic images that we can probably remember where we were when this happened. I can remember being in the library in the 2nd grade in my grammar school and and hearing that Kennedy had been shot. It was a momentous occasion for so many of us. And this has become an iconic image. And so sad in the fate of John F. Kennedy Jr. himself, but an image, again, that will stand in our minds forever. And as we move along, 1964, the Beatles in Miami Beach, certainly the 1960s, a time period. This is again an American capturing this particular image of the fun and frolic of the Beatles, such an important part of our culture in the 1960s. We'll see other images. Harold Doc Edgerton, he was an MIT professor. This is certainly he worked in color, but he loved the scientific analysis of the photography. So 1964, same year as the Beatles, a color photographic print, the bullet through apple, that with the technology that had been created with photography, you think back on Muybridge, who was able to capture a horse in a gallop. We're now capturing a bullet coming through an apple. And this is just one of many of Doc Edgerton's photos. He was a scientist and also fascinated with what he could capture with the new technology of with photography. Again, many of the iconic images here we have Mickey Mantle in decline, the first game on June 20th, 1964 at Yankee Stadium, again from Life magazine, part of the Getty Images. And so we can see that these would be capturing for us even today. Many people who attended that event, what would that be, 60 years ago, remember again. They've now can capture that feeling, that thought, as we see in, again, Mickey Mantle throwing off his hat. Again, just an iconic image of an iconic individual. Certainly politics was an important part, and I loved this particular piece. This is Steve Shapiro. He was actually invited to attend the campaign of Robert F. Kennedy in New York City. This was in 1965. But what I wanted to particularly capture was this woman below. You can see again, she's grasping his hand. And again, we don't know. She looks like she might be in her 80s and surrounded by all of these young people. And again, the fervor of politics in the 1960s, so much that was happening during this particular period. But I just loved the relationship, the joy that having him again greet her, very likely Irish, and again seeing these wonderful children, the young people around him. It's again a very moving image that captures politics in the 1960s. Continuing again, these images from the 1960s. Here we see again Bernie Boston, flower power during the March on the Pentagon at the National Mobilization Committee to end the war in Vietnam. These are again images that capture our culture, and again flower power, and in terms of the revolts that were taking place, again, the riots that were taking place, again, the opportunity, in this case, peaceful resistance to the Vietnam War, a photograph that will bring back moments of time in our culture. Here we see the Olympics in 1968, an AP photograph. We can recall when U.S. athletes Tommy Smith and John Carlos steered downward during this playing of the Star-Spangled Banner. They were successful in receiving the gold and bronze medal during the Olympic Games, but again, they faced such discrimination and racism in America that again, this was a very symbolic, the Black Power salute, again, very symbolic. You might even say again, the strength of these athletes in representing America, but how poorly they were supported back in America. These are images again that become have such a strong political focus. And you'll see as we finish up this program, many of our images, again, coming from outer space, you might say. Again, NASA has a wonderful collection, and these are incredibly iconic images and seeing the Earth rise. This was taken by Apollo 8 crew member while in orbit. Again, Bill Anders. Of the moon, and this picture shows again the Earth rising above the lunar horizon. And these were capturing for all the world, what was now happening in the progress of of the world exploration, particularly America's exploration of the moon. Another here, Apollo 11, July 1969. After one of the orbits, again, the secondary burn pushed the spacecraft on a course towards the moon. Soon after this photograph was taken, looking back again towards home. Incredible images that really capture and make us so aware of how small we are in the universe. But these images, again, capture so much of our culture, so much of our achievements, so much of what we are and what we're able to accomplish looking back on this particular image of the Earth. Certainly Neil Armstrong's, when Buzz Aldrin saluting the American flag, also taking in Apollo 11. There were a number of iconic images captured by these images as astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin planted the American flag on the moon. So again, certainly Apollo 11 created a number, one step for mankind, man and mankind, so many different images that came out of these. And look at the quality. I mean, this is a place that has no air. You can see where the flag, there's no wind. It's just there. There's no gravity. And so it's just a phenomenal, the quality of these images that we're able to see, again, from the moon. The other political situations, again, this is more recent in 1973. Actually, when we think about it, 50 years ago still. Again, a piece from the Worcester Art Museum. This was a Pulitzer Prize-winning picture of a Vietnam POW. He'd been a POW for 5 years, and he's coming home again as his family greets him. Just so many of the iconic images. Here again, looking at the flower power, and now here a POW returning. So many of these images that capture the joyful moments of our history, but also events that reflect back on events like the Vietnam War. This is a photograph. Annie Leibovitz, born in 1949. Annie Leibovitz is still a photographer who's very, very well known. Again, 45 years after she'd created this particular image. But she's created images of Queen Elizabeth II, so many different images, but this is one that's very powerful. This is one that she was asked, he was going to be shown on the Rolling Stones magazine. So Annie Leibovitz was asked to go to the photo shoot at their home, and he did a variety of different poses. And this was one, he was nude. He wrapped himself around Yoko Ono, and he said, "This is the one that best reflects my relationship with Yoko Ono." And so he said to her, his quote, "You've captured our relationship exactly. Promise me it'll be on the cover." John Lennon was shot just 5 hours after this photograph was taken. So not only did it become an iconic image about the relationship between the two of them, but also just remembrance of just 5 hours later, that they would be walking out of the apartment building in New York City, and he would be assassinated. And so it's certainly an incredible photograph. Again, one that captures an iconic image, iconic person, two iconic people, in an iconic image. And now, as we finish, we see here again some of the disasters in our history, that again we can't help but remember where we were when these events happened. Here again, June 28th, 1986, when the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, 73 seconds into flight. Again, a disaster that really set back NASA, and that was just devastating for the world. Really set us incredible concern, in witnessing the death of these astronauts. And so we see again other images like this in 2001, as we come soon to celebrate again another anniversary, when we think 24 years ago, September 11th, that again, the attacks on the World Trade Center in New York City, when the United Airlines Flight 175 from Boston crashes into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. I'm sure we certainly all remember, and I remember that 9:03, my husband and I were watching the news. We were home and watching what was happening. Again, these disasters, these images, they're still certainly part of our history, but for decades, if not centuries, these will reflect our history as well as our culture. And again, they will stand the test of time to capture these moments in our history. In this case, again, just so devastating. But we see, similar to the flag being riven on, I'm sure there's a reference here, the flag being risen in Iwo Jima. Here we see on the same day, firefighters raise a U.S. flag at the site of the World Trade Center, September 11th, as a sign of patriotism and perseverance in the face of evil. So photographs can also be reminding us of the strength that we can have, certainly together, to overcome disasters like these. And then we see again, the space is still a source of wonder for us. Sunset on Mars in 2005. And again, the Mars rover Spirit capturing this quiet image. Again, what would people have thought in 1951? Again, thinking that not only we would see the moon, an image of the moon, but here an image of Mars and men walking on the moon. And so again, photography has created for us an incredible sense of history and awe and wonder. In 2007, just as we had seen with the POW, here again, Major Terry Garola returning from Afghanistan, again, returning home from war, as she's coming back into the Atlanta, reading her daughter. And again, just a reflection of our times, that there are women, again, when we think about the Civil War, when we think about the war images from Matthew Brady and Timothy O'Sullivan, we're now seeing a very different war. And we're seeing here a mother returning to her daughter after, again, a 7-month tour in Iraq. And the last image I want to share with you from 2020. This is entitled The Butterfly Nebulous. And this is, again, a gorgeous, gorgeous image. This is from the Hubble telescope. The Hubble telescope was launched in 1990. So now, 35 years ago, it has been bringing back to NASA and to the world phenomenal images, just incredibly beautiful images. It's orbiting around 350 miles above the Earth, and the early expected reentry is in the 2030s. So within our own lifetime, it's very, very likely, it will just basically, it keeps coming closer and closer, and eventually it will hit the atmosphere and it will burn up. But until then, it's here and available to create some of the most beautiful images. And I'm sure if you've seen others, but I just wanted to end with this particular image, the butterfly nebulous, really looking at the accomplishments of man and how photography through again more than 170 years in American culture has created images that will last forever, that will be really part of our history and our culture. And again, hopefully this very brief presentation has given you some nostalgic looks back and seen the importance of photography as capturing iconic images in our American history. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions or observations that you might have. If there are any particular photographs that have are particularly meaning for you, I'd love to hear that. I'm sure others would too.
Um, we, to answer a question that was earlier,
Mhm.
the Diego Rivera talk, it
Mm.
will not be recorded. So if you are interested in that program, you'll want to plan on attending. Um, let's
And
see
Janet
what
Mandel
else.
is wonderful. She does a lot of programs in my area also. So I think you'll very much enjoy Janet's program.
Um, when you, this was from when you were talking about the Brownie camera, someone said
Yes.
that the cameras were sold cheaply. Profits came from film and developing.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. And that's one of the reasons why when Polaroid came out, where Kodak really started to suffer. I mean, they were very innovative. You're absolutely right. And leave the development to us. And people used to send it back and they'd get, so you're absolutely right. And they just didn't grasp the changes that Polaroid was coming out with. And unfortunately, Kodak, if you ever have a chance to head up to northern New York, to the Eastman Kodak Museum. It's really fascinating. So there's some wonderful history. Thank you for sharing that.
And as someone mentioned here, we have the Gordon Parks Museum in Fort Scott, Kansas, which is
Mm.
not that far from Kansas City.
Wonderful. That's great. I've seen some wonderful pieces that the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston did a wonderful exhibition on Life magazine and the importance of Life magazine. I had not been aware, what the publication was. I mean, that 59% of the populace and with 8.1 million, they knew that someone would get a subscription and then it would be shared by people. It really changed our lives and our exposure to so many things, particularly the work of Gordon Parks. And that again, Life magazine was very, very innovative and really pushing the envelope in terms of some innovative pieces. And it was the photography that people really looked to for some of we could have just done the whole thing on time on the Life magazine photographs as iconic images. They were incredible. Thank you.
Um, the American Gothic House, you were talking about Grant Wood, is
Yes.
in, I forget what town in Iowa, but it's a state historic site, so you can actually tour it.
Oh,
Um,
great. Thank you.
and there's a number of museums in Iowa that have his work, but he also has some very wonderful murals that are in the library up at Iowa State
Oh,
that
yes.
were
Oh, in fact,
that were done during the
yes.
Depression.
Yeah, I had the opportunity. There's a bike race, not a race. Well, I guess it's a bike event.
The bike
Uh,
ride across the state, yeah,
Yes.
ride by.
Yes, I did that. And in fact, I think it was the 50th anniversary. My brother is a cyclist, so I went out to support him. And I had an opportunity to go to, I think one of the stops was Iowa State. What a fabulous, that's a fabulous ride. But again, really nice opportunity. And I had a chance. My brother would go off. I'd be bringing the tents and such and, driving to the next site.
Yeah.
But I would always stop at the various museums in the area. So yes, Iowa's got some really wonderful places not too far from you. Yes.
Yeah, his studio is in Cedar Rapids, although I'm not sure if it's open to the public.
Okay, okay, great. Any other
Uh,
questions or observations or particular photographs that are meaningful for you?
I'm just looking through here. Oh,
Great.
somebody says Kodak was pitched one of the first digital cameras, but passed.
Oh, gee. Yeah, timing is everything. I think again, Texas Instrument, really started moving forward it's just amazing when we look at the history of different things. Oh no, that's not gonna make much, or even the computers. Oh, that's gonna be a kind of a flash in the pan. And so yeah, it's really interesting. Like Kodak, Polaroid, so many of the companies, who knows what will happen with IBM and Apple and Intel and so many different groups. So yeah, the history and just photography itself has increased. And that next one of the other programs that you'll be doing when you look at movies from color to from black and white to color. I mean, it's just really fascinating, the technology, and looking at, some of them are cultural pieces, but the work by Doc Edgerton or the Hubble telescope, just so much innovation that's taking place also. It's really quite exciting. And how important photography is to our history, in capturing our history, and even in our own lives. With digital photography, I do find that I don't show my images as much. I liked kind of printing them out, having them developed, and then I would create collages. It's easy to take photographs now, but you don't tend to see them as often. You don't print them as often. So I'm hoping that we'll be capturing more images that we can be then sharing with other people. But we can certainly share them, through Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. We can certainly share a variety of photographs now. So, but photography is such an important element to our history, and I hopefully this gives you a sense of how important it was.
Uh, we've got lots of wonderful presentations and thank
Oh,
yous in here. Several people have suggested adding the Kent State
ah,
photos.
yes. Well, this has certainly been my pleasure. Beth, any other questions or observations that we want to share?
We've got somebody typing, I believe.
Okay, great.
So we'll give it a minute here and see.
Sure. Actually, I work with the Worcester Art Museum in Worcester, Massachusetts, and they actually were one of the first museums. I think it was 1962, to really think about photography as an art medium, to exhibit it. Certainly artists like Alfred Stieglitz and Arnold Newman, they were thinking about it as artists, but to really start collecting uh, photographs. And again, 1962, we saw Arnold Newman had donated some as gifts. There was one of the first major exhibitions of photographs at the Worcester Art Museum, and so I think that's probably why the Worcester Art Museum has gotten some really interesting works in that year, because they had one of the first photography exhibitions. They're one of the key areas that started collecting them as works of art. And people might say, well, is the NASA, is the Hubble telescope, is that art? Yeah, it's really interesting to see, because man is kind of operating it, but it's just really out there in space. So it's really our technology that it's allowed us to do. It's not someone behind the camera. And certainly with AI, people can manipulate images extensively. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with images because of so many of the technological innovations that are taking place.
Yeah, we've got the link to the survey posted in chat again.
And again, Beth will send you a list. I took the the labels that I use for all the images. So if you want to go through and kind of get a reference and look back at something, find a little bit more research on something. I just wanted to give you a kind of a brief overview, but I wanted to share that with you so that if you wanted to go back in and find out more about any of the images, you'll have that list available also.
Yeah, I will email that out as well as the link to the recording once it is available.
Great.
So thank you, everybody, for attending this evening, and we hope you'll join us for some future programs.
Very good. Beth, thank you so much. Stay happy and
Thank
healthy,
you.
everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye now. Take care.